Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the general principles for coding of medication errors. I just want to first thank everyone for taking the time to sign up for this class and attend today. So this class, unlike MedDRA coding basics and the advanced MedDRA coding, will focus primarily on the medication error side of coding. So medication errors can be found in both clinical and safety databases and could occur at any time, so it's important to understand the concepts associated with them. The webinar should last around 90 minutes to 2 hours, and in an attempt to keep this class as interactive as possible, I'll be taking questions throughout the webinar today. So please feel free to ask a question via the questions panel in the upper right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar screen. You should see it on your screen today. Also today, I'll be working with Sarah, who you just heard shortly a little while ago. She'll be monitoring the questions and ensuring everything goes well from a technical perspective. And I just wanted to say thank you very much, Sarah, for all of your help today. She has also given everyone temporary access to the browser for those that don't have access to their own browsers. So the information can be found in the chat area, as she mentioned earlier. So please be sure to log in to the browser as we begin, as it will help to make the class more fun and interactive. You could follow along. You could practice. As we go through some exercises a little later in the class, there'll be opportunity for you to kind of, go in the browser and look around and practice. And I'll do a really short demo also today in the browser, and you can kind of follow along. So make sure you log on. And if you are having any trouble, you can chat with Sarah, and she'll make sure you get in the browser today. So again, there's typically a lot of information given in these webinars. So it's good to have ways to help trigger your memory, at least for me anyway. So, and like Sarah said, this webinar will be recorded, and as long as the quality is good, it will be available on YouTube. Okay, so with all that being said, let me introduce myself. So my name is Nicole Fornerato. I'm a clinical associate with the MSSO. I'm based in northern New Jersey, kind of in the New York City area, and I'm coming to you today from a very sunny but extremely windy New Jersey fall morning, I guess you could say. So I joined the MSSO about 3 years ago. And before that, like all of you, I was a MedDRA user. I worked in both clinical and safety post-marketing environments using MedDRA in a variety of different roles. So I was once in your shoes. So hopefully I could take you on a fun journey today to learn some more about medication errors. So this slide is just a general slide that we always show to let you know that ICH adopted the development of MedDRA in the mid-90s and became the owner of the terminology. The ICH then appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, to provide and organize corresponding training, and to administer the MedDRA licenses. So all of these MSSO activities are overseen by the ICH, MedDRA committee. So the ICH, this is just our normal disclaimer. They're not only the owner of MedDRA, but they also own this training material, so it's protected worldwide. With that being said, you can use the slides with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but you will have to clearly indicate that the ICH owns the copyright, and if the presentation is used and any changes take place, they must be clearly identified, and any impression that the ICH has endorsed those changes should be avoided. Okay, so what will we be talking about today? I'm just going to pull everything up at once. So during today's webinar, we will cover a variety of topics, including the regulatory background for medication errors. We'll discuss definitions and terminologies for product use concepts based on ICH guidance documents. After that, we'll look into the general principles for coding of medication errors. Next, we'll apply these principles, like I mentioned, in some exercises we're going to do using the MedDRA browser and just kind of the stuff we learned today to go through kind of the process for how you can tackle these terms in the future. And finally, we will conclude with question and answer, but we'll take questions throughout. So feel free, like I said, to ask throughout. Okay, so this slide is just how we're gonna be a little more interactive today. We're gonna use Poll Everywhere. You can log into Poll Everywhere by going to www.pollev.com/NicoleF, as you can see down here. You could just click skip when it comes up. You don't have to enter a username, and then you can just click join. Alternatively, you can use my QR code. So if you get your camera and you want to do the polling from your camera instead of your laptop, just take a picture of that code. We all know how to use them at this point, right? They're so popular. But and it will take you to the activity. And once I activate the first poll, which will be in a second, you'll be able to see the material. And again, if you have any problems with that, just let us know and we'll try to help you as best we can to get in. But I'll give everybody a second here to kind of get logged into the browser, hopefully, and also poll everywhere before we begin with our first poll. Okay, so now what we'll do is we're going to start with our first poll. I'm going to activate this. If you could just let me know where you are located today. This actually is my favorite poll, slide, everything of the whole day. I love to see where the audience is located, see where everyone's calling in from. Wow, all over the place. This is amazing. It truly, truly is my favorite. Oh, somebody was in Greenland, but then it went away. I was hoping that stayed. All right. Somebody's down by Antarctica. Oh, this is great. We have representation in so many countries and continents even. Wow. Very nice. And it looks like the poll's working, so that always makes me happy as well. All right, I'll give everyone a little more time to just get situated, and then we'll go on to the second poll. This is so exciting. So representation from all over. Very nice. Okay, so the second poll we're going to do today is, what role do you perform? Again, I'm just, I like to see, make sure this is working, but I also like to know what my audience consists of. Like, what do you all do? And I forgot to mention, I might have forgot to mention, but everything done in Poll Everywhere is completely anonymous. So feel free to give it your best go, put whatever you want if there's an open-ended area, and don't worry about anybody knowing who you are or who's typing or anything. So I see we have a lot of PV people. That's great. Makes sense, right? We're in a medication error webinar. Medical directors, monitors, reviewers. This is great. Regulatory. Very nice. Okay, we got some medical coding representation as well, which always makes me happy. Oh, bacteriologist. Very nice. Safety physician. So in addition to seeing where the audience is globally, I love to see what everyone does. This is great. We have a very diverse audience, both in regions and roles. So this makes me so happy. CRA, safety monitor, great. Okay, just give a couple more seconds for everyone to be able to get their responses in, and then we'll get back to the presentation. We'll get going. Inspector, oh, very nice. That's one you don't see too often, inspector, so that's nice to have. Oh, deputy QPPV, very nice. Okay. All right, well, I'll keep this open, and in the meantime, I'm going to get going just for interest of time. So we already went through these polls. All right, so let's get started. So with the logistics out of the way, and we know Poll Everywhere is working, we're going to get going. Okay, so first we'll look into the regulatory background, because this is an important topic that is of interest to many regulatory authorities around the world. An example of this, in the US, it's estimated that 7,000 to 9,000 deaths occur each year due to a medication error. So the most common reasons for errors include failure to communicate drug orders, illegible handwriting, wrong drug selection, chosen from a drop-down menu, confusion over similarly named drugs, confusion over similarly named packaging between products, or errors involving dosing units or weight. Medication errors may be due to human errors, but it often results from a flawed system with inadequate backup to detect mistakes. So just to give a little background, I'm just going to pull up the whole slide first. Okay, so medication errors are a critical and important problem in healthcare. They are not only of great importance for the patients concerned, but also have a huge impact on healthcare costs. So they represent the most frequent preventable, as you can see here highlighted on the slide, reason for adverse events in the use of medicinal products. And since they are actually preventable, they are in focus of regulatory authorities. So depending on countries and regions, they support the recording, coding, reporting, and evaluation of these errors in order to gain new insights into the extent and causes of medication errors. So in order to develop improved strategies for their prevention, to protect patient safety, but also to reduce healthcare costs, right? So because the costs associated with medication errors could be much better used in other areas of the healthcare system. Okay, so there have been lots of regulatory initiatives around medication errors. So these initiatives led to an adaptation of MedDRA. So this adaptation consists of new terms being added, as well as the restructuring of the hierarchy to better support specific coding. And of course, after coding is complete, the data retrieval and analysis of that data. So medication errors and product use issues. So this topic is not only relevant to the post-marketing sector, but it's also very important for clinical development, including clinical trials. So this is why I was so happy to see the diversity in the audience with positions and roles and job titles and things like that, that we have a mix of both, say, safety and clinical. So I'm happy to see that. So the modifications to MedDRA also led to modifications to the points to consider and the companion documents, which we'll get into. So before we move on to the next topic, I'll just take a quick second just to see if there are any questions came through, Sarah.
We do not at this time.
Okay, great. So everything must be working well, so that's great. So as mentioned already, the PTC documents have been updated and supplemented to provide more guidance and assistance to MedDRA users on this topic. Okay, so this slide is just a visual representation of the PTC document. So as mentioned in other classes, I'm sure you heard this, or just working with MedDRA in general, it's a good idea to become very familiar with this document and its content. So taking a closer look into the document, from a medication errors, product use issues perspective, you will see there's not much guidance around these topics. There's some, but it's quite limited. It's just here what's on the screen. And while the PTC is a great document, when it comes to medication errors and product use issues, it's important to note that there's another document available that provides more detailed information, examples, and guidance. So unlike the PTC document, the companion document is not updated every year, but instead it's updated as needed, even though it's a living document. And here is the cover page of the new version 3.0 that was released in September this year. So amendments were made to the medication error section and new examples were added. Also, a new chapter was added addressing manufacturing and quality system issues, meaning product quality issues that are caused before the medicinal products reaches the actual medication use process. So in the companion document, you'll find much more detailed explanations around medication and product use issues. So although we won't go into detail around some of these topics today, I will highly recommend taking a closer look at the document. I know we're all busy, but it's really helpful to take some time to read through these documents to better understand the terminology and classification of such events with many practical examples in there. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up the MedDRA website. So it's www.meddra.org, and I'm going to show you how to access these documents. So it's very simple. So you just go to www.meddra.org. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, you could click on PTC, just like I did. And as you could see, I'm not logged in. I'm just on the website, so anybody can access this. And you will see here that we have the points to consider document, as well as the points to consider companion document. See, in the 3.0 releases here, we have it in both PDF and Word. And you can, very simply just click on the PDF, open it, and then save it to your computer wherever you feel it's best, your desktop or a folder, or if you want your whole organization to view it, save it onto a SharePoint site in your organization. So it's that simple. And like I said, so easy. You don't need a login or username or anything. You can just access these documents. So they're great. And you could see there's other documents as well that we use in other courses when we go more into data analysis side of things. Okay, so before we go into further details, we will have to familiarize ourselves with the terms that refer to medication errors and other product use errors and issues. Okay, so here the concept description of the term medication error taken from the, here's the concept description, I should say, taken from the MedDRA browser. So a medication error is any unintentional and preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient. While the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication use process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or their families, the second aspect that is highlighted down here in green is important to remember. So these errors occur during product use in the medication use process when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers. In other words, outside of the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. And the concept description further explains that medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the products themselves, and healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, product labeling, product packaging, preparation of products and their dispensing, distribution, and administration, as well as related education and product monitoring. So I know that was a lot of information, and you have these slides to go back and reference. And again, you'll have this on YouTube to go back and reference as well. So moving on to product use concepts. So the points to consider document for measured term selection, it contains a table in chapter 3.16 where product misuse, abuse, and addiction are addressed. So this table facilitates a high-level classification of product use errors and problems, comparing misuse, abuse, and addiction with the concepts medication error and off-label use. So 3 criteria are used for this purpose. Was the deviation intentional, a conscious decision, or did it happen in error? Was it unintentional, right? Who caused the event? Who triggered it? The patient or the consumer or a healthcare professional? And did it happen in the context of therapeutic use or product, or therapeutic use of the product? Yes or no? So basically, you could see this table incorporates all of that. So it's just important to note that definitions of misuse may not always include the concept of therapeutic use. Misuse may be similar to the concept of abuse in some regions, like, for example, in German-speaking countries. So that's also important to keep in mind. As you saw today, we were a very global audience, and I'm sure most of us work very globally. So it's important to keep in mind every region's information. Okay, so now let me illustrate these scenarios with some practical examples. So here we have Lisa, and she has stress at work. In the first scenario, the doctor prescribes 1 tablet of a sleeping pill at night to help her sleep better. But since she is still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, she decides to take another tablet. This is a conscious decision on her part, a deviation from the prescribed treatment regimen for therapeutic purposes, right? So in that case, in other words, an intentional misuse of medication, an intentional drug misuse, right? So we'll go on to a second scenario. So a friend advises her to look for painkillers on the internet to calm down. She orders the medication and takes 1 tablet a day at first, but then continuously increases the dose to 4 tablets a day. So here we also have a conscious decision by Lisa to take these painkillers to calm down. So she deviates from the actual therapeutic indication and gradually takes too much of them. So in this case, this constitutes a product abuse, here a drug abuse. So in the third scenario, Lisa does not tolerate the sleeping pill. She is dazed after waking up, so the doctor prescribes her a painkiller off-label instead. Here we have a conscious decision by the doctor for therapeutic purposes, and we also know that this is an off-label use for an unapproved indication. So in this case, off-label use of the product, the medication. So please note that the 3 criteria which are required for high-level classification as off-label use are met. But for coding purposes, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under the PT off-label use. So off-label use has to be explicitly mentioned in the verbatim or the case in order to be able to code the information accordingly. And why is that? It's because off-label use refers to the unapproved use of an approved drug in a specific country. And this information is not available for coders in most instances, right? Most instances when you're performing medical coding, you really literally just receive the term that you're coding. You don't have any additional information. So medical coders shouldn't make that decision unless off-label use is explicitly reported. So again, related guidance can be found in both the points to consider and the companion document around this. And finally, in the fourth scenario, Lisa suffers from forgetfulness due to the stress she is experiencing at her workplace. She also forgets that she has already taken her medication one day and takes it a second time. This is unintentional, but happens in the context of therapeutic use. So in this case, it represents a medication error. So now that we went through the examples, I will show you kind of the decision tree and what it looks like. I'm just going to pull everything up. It's just easier. So you can see everything as I go through it. So the following flow chart visualizes this decision-making process. So we will see this chart a lot today as it's the basis for our decision-making, right? So I'm going to go through the tree now, and then as we go through exercises and as we go through examples at the end of the class, you'll keep seeing this tree, and you'll kind of get used to it, and hopefully it will start to stick. When you see these types of terms come in, you can start to go through this process yourself. So here are the three core questions. Is it intentional or unintentional? Caused by whom? And in the context of therapeutic use, yes or no? So let us assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. This may be decided by healthcare professionals or by patients' consumers, as you can see in the tree. So if this is a conscious decision by the healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. These three criteria are required for the high-level classification of an off-label use. But remember, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under the PT off-label use, as we discussed. Off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. I'll keep saying that over and over today, so it kind of hopefully starts to stick, right? You'll hear that a lot. It should only be selected when it is specifically mentioned. So if an intentional deviation from product information originates from the patient or consumer and happens in the therapeutic setting, we classify this as intentional product misuse. So if the deviation does not occur within the therapeutic use of the product, the deviation is then classified as drug abuse or drug addiction, as we can see here. And then if the unapproved product use is intentional or accidental, unintentional, or accidental, this can also be caused by both the healthcare professionals or patients' consumers, right? Either one can kind of make an unintentional mistake. So if this error occurs in the context of the therapeutic use of the relevant product, it is classified as a medication or product use error. So get familiar with this chart. We're going to see it a lot. Like I mentioned, you'll be sick of it by the end of the webinar. Okay, so you may now argue that in many cases, it's not clear whether such a deviation was intended or unintended. So here you can see an example for such a scenario. It's reported that the patient took an extra tablet before going to bed. If no further information is available, we do not know what the background was, right? Did the patient misunderstand the doctor's instructions or the package leaflet? This would then represent a medication error. Or did the doctor mistakenly give her the wrong schedule with the prescription? This would also represent a medication error, in this instance, a prescribing error. Or is the patient's discomfort getting worse at bedtime, so she decided to take one more tablet? This scenario would constitute an intentional drug misuse, right? Because the patient decided to take the extra tablet. Or did the doctor decide to use the drug off-label because he was convinced that the treatment would be more effective this way? Our case information does not allow for any of these classifications. So what can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes when no further information can be attained? Say you sent queries, you checked the source docs, you looked in the narrative, you just can't get any additional information. So what do you do now? So in this instance, for such coding scenarios, MEDRA contains very vague, non-specific PTs. So if it's not clear whether such an event happened by mistake or intentionally, LLTs under the PT product use issue can be found, which is a very general term. And if you want to go in your browser, you can start to type in product use and start to look around and see what's near there, just to get a sense of what other general terms are available. And if it's not clear whether an intentional deviation from proper product use happens for therapeutic reasons, a suitable LLT under the PT intentional product use issue can be selected. So there we go. And then we have, if we're unsure, the intentional deviation was for therapeutic reasons, then intentional product use issue, as I mentioned. Okay, so now we have the flowchart yet again. So the one before must therefore be expanded with these two neutral terms. And as you can see here with the question mark, it has been expanded. So if it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient happens for therapeutic reasons or not, an appropriate LLT under the PT intentional product use issue should be assigned. If it cannot be clarified whether an unapproved product use by a HCP or patient consumer occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under the PT product use issues should be assigned. So there you go. And there you see the decision tree now expanded to include that. So here's just the browser view. Let me just click everything on here first so you have it up while I'm speaking. But these two are quite vague terms, but you'll find other more specific terms in MedDRA for dose or schedule deviations, which are, so to speak, neutral because they do not contain the information accidental or intentional. They can be chosen in combination with other MedDRA terms for intentional misuse, off-label use, or medication errors, and allow us to capture the details of what actually happened when no suitable combination term can be found in MedDRA. So in this screenshot from the MedDRA browser, you can see some of these neutral PTs. They're all highlighted here, like extra dose administered, inappropriate schedule of product administration, incorrect dose administered, product dose omission issue, etc. Okay, so now, in order to efficiently and effectively search for suitable MedDRA terms for verbatims that relate to unapproved product use, so deviations from the approved product information, the label, it is relevant to understand MedDRA's structure and rules and details of the guidance documents, right? But it's also important to make yourself familiar with the MSSO MedDRA browsing tools or your own in-house MedDRA browser if you have one. I will now use the browser to show you where to find some of these relevant terms and make you familiar with the hierarchy. So I'll just pull up this picture, but let me actually pull up the browser. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the HLGT of medication errors. So I'll pull that up now. So all I did was I clicked on my HLGT here because I knew I was searching for an HLGT. I wanted to find anything relevant to medication errors. And you can see here, I only typed medication errors and it popped up. So what I could do is I can look to see what SOC that falls in by just clicking the plus sign, or I can right click on this term and say, go to browser. And then from here, I could see where it's located under the injury SOC, right? And what we can do is we can just expand that to see which HLTs fall under this HLGT. And from there, you can look for whatever you need. So say you want more miscellaneous, now elsewhere classified type terms of medication errors. You could just click the plus on that HLT and pull up all the PTs that are available under that HLT. And then again, if you want to see more specifically, say you want to see a device placement issue, just click on that and all the LLTs that are available for coding will pop up. So we'll do the same here. I'm actually going to shut off my non-currents because I don't want those to pop up. But we'll do the same here for off-label use, right? Which may also come into play. So here, I can actually shut off my LLTs for now. And we'll go see the HLGT of off-label use, right? We'll right-click on that and we'll go to the browser. And then again, you can open it up and kind of search around and see what's available for off-label uses. You could see here, not many PTs, not nearly as many as the last category. And then again, you could do it, say you're interested in looking for overdose. You can do that again. Say, hey, I'm interested in overdose. Are there any HLGTs available? And in this case, we can see here that there are overdoses and underdoses. It's 1-HLGT. And again, you can right click on that. And again, you could follow along since you have access to the browser. And you could say, go to browser. And again, you can just open it and check around. So you see we have a category for overdoses and a category for underdoses. You kind of see what's available in the browser. It helps tremendously. So one more thing I want to show you is that there is an HLGT of psychiatric disorders available, not elsewhere classified, right? And if we right click on this, you maybe wouldn't associate this so much with medication errors, but if you go to the browser and you kind of start to look around, you open up the HLGT, you can see that there's an HLT of substance-related and addictive disorders. So you say, okay, that might be something I'm interested in. So again, you can open it up and scroll down and see what's available. And here you can see there's everything from binge drinking to alcohol abuse available under there. So just something to keep in mind. And again, you don't have to worry about remembering which HLGTs or anything I'm looking at today, because you can always go back to the YouTube and reference this presentation and kind of see if you forget, or just do some searching on your own, look around. That's why it's important to always look multiple places for kind of what terms are available. And then the last thing I wanted to show you today in the browser are the MedDrug concept descriptions. Very, very important piece. So here we have, you just click the button up in the upper left-hand corner and it will pop up. And you can see here that all the MedDrug concept descriptions are available, say for abuse, medication error. If you're into that, you can just click on M. You could see here medication error, medication monitoring error, misuse. We have off-label use. If you keep scrolling down, we'll have overdose. So these are very important to become familiar with. And again, they're always available in the browser, either your desktop browser or they're available in your web-based browser. And then you can just click on the concept descriptions tab like I did, so simple, and you have them all. And you can always, copy paste this into a Word document if you want to keep it outside the browser or whatever you want to do. So they are available for you. And just as a reminder, let me get out of here, go back to my presentation. I put in a screenshot where you can find them so that you have a reminder of what we discussed. And I also put in a screenshot for that relates to the hierarchy of relevant terms like we just discussed. So you have it as a reference after this presentation. So you could see here the ones that fall under injury, the first ones we kind of looked at versus the one that falls under psychiatric, the second one we looked at today. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to take a quick second to see, Sarah, are there any questions? Did any questions come in?
Nope, still none at this time.
Perfect. All right, so we will continue. Okay, again, I like to pull up everything. I put in these features, but then I like to pull up the whole slide for everyone to look at while I'm going through so you can kind of visualize as I'm talking. So what kind of terms can we find under the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and problems? So we can find PTs for certain types of errors such as wrong drug, wrong patient, or wrong route, right? And terms that link to an error to a stage in the medication use process, such as the prescribing stage. So other terms combine a type of error with a stage in the medication use process. So some reside under more general PT, and others are represented on PT level, as you can see in the example. And in addition, there are terms for intercepted errors prevented by third-party intervention so that they didn't reach the patient, as well as MedDrug also contains two PTs that describe the possibility of an error or signal, a circumstance that could potentially lead to a medical device use error or a medication error. So as well as more vague PTs, which can be used when it is unclear whether the reported incident was due to an error or happened intentionally. So you can see that the LLTs linked to medication error PTs are often more than just synonymous terms, right? They often contain more specific information. So for example, PTs for errors reflecting a stage of the medication use process, they may contain LLTs for specific types of errors occurring within that stage. So always, like I mentioned, and like I showed you when we were going through the browser, always search for the most specific LLT when coding to capture the full information of what has been reported. And like I said, you know, when you go in a browser, you can do just snippets of terms like I showed here. If you're looking for, like, if you want to see if there's an HLGT or even HLT or just PTs related to medication error, you can kind of just do like a snippet of a term and start looking. And then you'll see all the categories will pop up for you. Okay, so with that, we're going to go to a quiz question. So with all that being said, let me just pull up my polling tool. We're going to go to our first actual quiz question and see how everyone does. So I'm going to activate this. And you might want to use your scroll bar to see all the choices that are here. But how would you code dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label? So give it your best go. Let's see what people are thinking here. Oh, right now, 100%. Wow, we have a lot of people online too. And okay, now we're getting some some different choices. So I always like to see what pops up here. Okay, so let's see. Underdose is still winning, but we're getting lots of other. So again, dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. All right, give a couple more seconds. Okay, so it looks still looking like 2/3 of you. And again, use your browser, kind of search around, maybe pull up the terms that are available in this quiz. So it looks like most of you voted for underdose. And with that being said, underdose is correct. So good job, everyone who voted for underdose. So the concept description for underdose was, underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose in quantity and/or concentration. So what is reported is definitely an underdose. We don't know whether this underdose was taken accidentally or intentionally, and that is why we have to select a vague term that is LLT underdose, and not the LLT accidental underdose, which I see here, actually no one voted for, so that's good. It is not a dosage error, right? Based on the concept descriptions, the term dosage refers to the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, and number of doses, a broader term that does not only cover dose deviations, but also administration schedule and duration. And the LLT drug administration error, which we come down, oh, it's up right here. That one's much too vague. I see not many people actually voted for that. So good job to everyone who voted for underdose. Okay, so now I'm gonna pull up the next quiz question. Just gonna activate it. So how would you code inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pill? Give it your best go. Give everyone a couple seconds to get their choices in. Lots of movement. I like to keep the polls moving while people are choosing as well. Keeps it interesting. All right, looks like we're kind of 2/3 again on one term. So inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pill. All right, looks like the poll is slowing down. So let's have a look. So let's see, we are all leaning towards right now at 75% actually. That's a huge, for all the people on the line, just think everyone's so global and there's so many people online. It's 77 actually % of you are all choosing the same term. It's very, very good. So we are told that the excessive dose was taken inadvertently or accidentally, but it is an accidental overdose or an accidental dose increase. So do you remember the concept description of overdose? So overdose is more than the maximum recommended dose in quantity or concentration, an excessive dose. So in this case, the people who chose accidental overdose, you are correct. So great job. So good job on the polls so far. Very good. Everyone's an expert so far. So with that, I'm just going to go through and get back to my presentation. So Sarah, are there any questions yet to date or just a quick check-in?
Still no questions.
Great. All right, and I'm happy to see that there's so much agreement too on the line. It's very interesting. I love to see that because, um, sometimes polls, there's so much scattering, but it looks like here everyone's in alignment. So with that being said, now we're going to move on to some general principles for coding medication errors. Okay, so first, a short reminder regarding the basic rules to be followed for coding with MedDRA. So the quality of the reported information and the extraction of relevant information during data entry are a basic requirement for good and meaningful coding. So if the information received is vague or maybe ambiguous, right, of poor quality, we'll say, you should always ask for clarification. So coding is done at the LLT level, and the LLT that most accurately and most specifically reflects the reported incidents and events should always be selected. So nothing should be interpreted, added, and no relevant information should be omitted. So that's a very important piece there. Never interpret, add, or omit information from a term, right? In this case, sometimes I like to say, like, kind of you have to take your hat off in a sense, because if you're a physician or say, a CRA, safety, whatever your role is, sometimes we all get siloed into our roles and we kind of look at it from our perspective. But I always say with medical coding, whether it be general medical coding or medication error medical coding, or just the review of these medication errors that maybe have been coded, it's best to always take your hat off and try not, as hard as it is sometimes, to infer certain things when you see a term. Say, okay, I know what that is going to be, or I understand what this patient is talking about. Kind of have to take our hat off and kind of keep it very neutral. Don't ever add, omit, or interpret anything, right? Just what it is, that's what it's got to be, nothing else. And of course, only current LLTs should be used for coding. So did you see, and when I was in the browser, I said, okay, I'm going to turn off my non-current LLTs, because in this case, I'm performing coding, or I'm looking for terms that can be used during the coding process. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't pulling up any LLTs that I should not be using. So I'll show that again in the browser. I'll pull it up. Up here, you have an option where you can show non-currents, which if you take our other coding courses, we can go into detail about this and why it's important that they're there and things like that, which we won't go into today. But for purposes of actually coding or reviewing or analyzing data that was coded, you want to keep this off because you don't want to look for a term that maybe then isn't a good represent or should not be, a term should not be coded to. So I'm not sure I assume you're all very familiar with these basic rules. So at this point, I won't go into them any further, but again, it's just very good rules to keep in mind as you go through the process of coding or reviewing coded terms for medication errors. So in this slide, for coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful, right? One item of importance is to become familiar with the MedDRA concept descriptions and the points to consider, like I said, companion documents. You should also have a good knowledge of the MedDRA structure and hierarchy, particularly in the SOC, injury, poisoning, and procedural complications, which is, as you saw, where a big bulk of these medication error terms lie. If you don't have a good solid background, maybe you're brand new to MedDRA and you just figured you'd take this course today, what I would recommend is maybe taking a MedDRA basics, or, if you're maybe a little beyond basic, but not quite at the advanced level, we also have an advanced, and we go very much into the structure, scope, and hierarchy of MedDRA. So you can get some information behind that. And then once you've found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check if the placement of selected LLT PT accurately reflects the reported event, right? So it's best to search the MedDRA hierarchy top down when coding medication errors, and use other product use concepts unless you are already experienced in coding such incidents. So top down, bottom up, it's just like what we saw here, how I was opening the plus sign. We may reference that, but that's all that means. It's just, you can see it this way, or you can go to the browser, right click on the term and click go to browser, and then you can come over here and kind of open it. So those are the approaches we take which I showed you in the demo. Okay, so I'm just going to pull these all up. So the companion document specifies some principles for coding medication and other product use errors. So when you use the PT medication error, it contains when to select more than one term, when to use the PT off-label use, how to capture potential and intercepted medication errors, how to capture both the specific type of error and the stage of the medication use process where the error occurred, when to capture the contributing factor leading to medication errors, and like I mentioned, that we should not infer a medication error, and then also capture medication errors related to products with a drug delivery system, a drug delivery device, I should say. So this section was rewritten and amended when it was previously titled Device Use Errors, Wrong Technique, and Device Malfunction. So if you're interested in these products because they are relevant for your company and your coding tasks, take a look at this section in the documents. There's information, more information around it if you want additional information in addition to what we will do today. So now what I will do is I will address each of these principles one by one. So the first principle refers to the use of the PT medication error. So as medical coders, we should not use this term unless we have no further information reported in the case. So whether you're a medical coder or a reviewer, if you see this term, say you're doing analysis or you're a safety physician or a clinical physician, you're not interested in how am I going to code this because you're not doing the day-to-day coding. You just see this term come through and it's coded to medication error. So it should try to be refrained unless no other information. So if you see that come through, you might want to take a look and say, hey, should we query this? Is it something we need more information around? Or is it okay to kind of keep it at that PT of medication error? So if you do have further information, then search the hierarchy under the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, and select the most specific LLT that you can find. And if a specific error is reported, but you cannot find any suitable term, then please, what you can do is submit a change request to the MSSO to get a better term. Try not to, you can't like invent terms or put terms into the dictionary. So what we ask to do is submit a change request. If you are unfamiliar how to do that, again, some of our other courses go through how to do that. So you can look on our training site and we can get you a better understanding of how to submit a change request. But that's what we suggest you do. And in the meantime, if you do need to submit a change request to get a better term, maybe put in Medra, one that we don't already have, what you would do is you would assign the LLT that is the closest match to reported term. And that LLT can then serve as a placeholder, say until the term you submitted, which hopefully gets approved, is then available in the Medra dictionary. Okay, so here's an example. If it's only reported that a patient inadvertently didn't use the medication as prescribed and no further information is available, then of course, what we just discussed, medication error can be selected, which is grouped under the PT of medication error. Okay, so sometimes you will get a report of a chain of events where an initial error leads to additional consequent errors or even adverse events in the patient, right? So what you would first do is code the initial originating error as the priority. And then all consequent errors in the medication use process and adverse events have to be coded in addition as reported. So if a prescribing error for the wrong drug is reported that consequently resulted in the wrong drug being dispensed and eventually administered, the full information should be coded by assigning the LLT wrong drug prescribed plus the LLT wrong drug dispensed plus the LLT wrong drug administered to capture these consequent errors. And do not forget to also capture the contributing factors that led to this chain of events. We'll discuss these contributing factors in more detail in a little bit. But what you want to do is avoid double coding the same error when it doesn't add additional information. So you wouldn't put one piece of a term to the same term twice, because what is that really going to do for analysis except cause a headache, right? And when we say here, you want to code to separate LLTs, sometimes you do, especially in clinical, you can't just separate a term out. You have to send a query to do this. So that in this case, a query would need to go out to the site to have this term split. In safety, sometimes, you have source docs, you have other narrative, you have other information where maybe the case managers or whoever's in charge of the data in safety can append that information to the term and make it codable. so that you can get all three of these pieces coded and have the appropriate LLTs attached. And again, a query may also have to go out. It all depends on how your organization chooses to handle those types of terms. But in clinical, it must always go out, right? Because you cannot touch any data in clinical. So again, as an example for this principle, it's reported that a nurse miscalculated the dose and the patient received 40 milligrams instead of 20 milligrams of his medication. And from that, he experienced severe hypotension. So first, we would capture the initial error with the LLT dose calculation error. Then the subsequent administration error with the LLT incorrect dose administered, and of course, the resulting adverse event in the patient, the hypotension. So it's a chain of events starting with the dose calculation error that leads to the administration of an incorrect dose, and finally to an adverse reaction in the patient, the hypotension, as you can see here. And again, this would obviously, if this came in clinical, you would need to query to split it out. And it's important to note if this came in safety, you know, the way the data got pulled that needs to be coded should be looked into, right? So they can all get coded correctly. So our third principle today refers to off-label use. So we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but always consider the criteria and information required to select a term under the PT off-label use. So off-label use relates to situations where a healthcare professional intentionally prescribes, dispenses, or recommends a product for a medical purpose, not in accordance with the authorized product information. It has to be a HCP, it has to be intentional, and for a medical purpose in the context of therapeutic use, right? These are the criteria that must be met for high-level classification. The highlighted sentence was added to the points to consider documents that were released in March 2023 and 2024, and related guidance can also be found in the companion document. So as a coder, off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. So coders should not take this decision when only the three criteria, intentional, for a medical purpose by HCP, are met, because it needs more specific product knowledge and information about the country of origin of the reported case. So local regulations and the product information, as we all know, it differs sometimes between regulatory regions, right? What may be one thing in Canada may not be the same in the US, or same in the US and different in Europe or Asia or wherever we are in the world, right? So try to obtain clarification. But if no further information can be obtained, do not infer that off-label use occurred. And as we know, some medications even have different makeups and different ingredients in different countries, right? And things like that. So you always have to be aware of the local, of the regulatory regions and the local information as well. So regulators are very clear in this, and you'll see that in all the examples of off-label use in the points to consider document, the off-label use is clearly named in the wording, as we mentioned. So let us look at an example. So it's reported that a pediatrician decided to use COVID-19 vaccine off-label for his 10-year-old high-risk patient, although not yet approved for this age group. So does this verbatim fulfill the criteria for classification as off-label use? And is off-label use explicitly mentioned? Those are questions maybe you want to ask yourself when you receive a term like this. So HCP has caused the deviation. It was a pediatrician, right? We also know that it was done intentionally. He decided to do so based on therapeutic considerations. The HCP also wanted to protect his 10-year-old patient from an infection. And we are told that he decided to use the COVID-19 vaccine off-label, meaning that vaccine is approved for immunization of COVID-19 in the respective country, but not for this age group. So the most specific LLT for this scenario, off-label use in unapproved age group under the PT, off-label use can be used. Okay, so principle number 4 refers to potential medication errors. So such incidents should also be captured, and MEDRA has 2 PTs for doing so. The PT of circumstance or information capable of leading to a medication error, with several more specific LLTs underneath, and the PT circumstance or information capable of leading to a device use error. So the type of potential error has to be captured as well as the PT circumstance or information capable of leading to medication errors. Groups several specific LLTs for doing so, like the LLT potential for medication error wrong dose, or the LLT potential for medication error wrong drug, and the potential for medication error wrong route, or even the newly added LLT database system product information issue. So in addition, measure terms that help capturing the contributing factors should also be selected. For instance, the LLT drug label lookalike. So why do some regulators want to receive this information? They're actually very keen to and why are they very keen to receive such information? Well, in such scenarios, no medication error happened yet. But of course, the error in it, but could, I should say, of course, occur in the near future based on the reported contributing factors like drug name confusion. So when understanding the background for these potential errors, regulators can take steps to prevent errors even before they're happening. So depending on your local regulatory requirements, do not omit such information, but capture all relevant information when receiving similar verbatims, and code both the potential for an error by selecting an appropriate LLT under one of these PTs. And if a specific potential error type is reported and no combination term is available, then of course we would split code or query to have the terms split and coded individually. And last but not least, don't forget to also code the contributing factor or factors, because sometimes there's more than one factor. Let's pull this all up. Okay, so here again, an example for this principle. A pharmacist reported that the blurred print on the drug label could lead to a medication error, that a wrong dose could be administered. No medication error occurred yet, but the pharmacist saw a circumstance, the blurred print on a label, that could lead to this error in the future. So remember, we would code the potential error by selecting the LLT potential for medication error wrong dose under the PT circumstance or information capable of leading to a medication error. This is a perfect combination term that captures the potential for a medication error and the type of error. If no such term would be available, again, maybe we'd have to query to split, or split coding would have to take place. And it would become necessary, and the type of potential error would have to be captured in addition by assigning LLTs like wrong patient, wrong schedule, or wrong rate. And we would also code the contributing factor that could lead to the medication error. So here, the blurred print on the label, by selecting the LLT product label text illegible under the PT product label issue can be selected. Okay, so the next principle, sometimes medication errors at an earlier stage of the medication use process are prevented from reaching the patient or consumer. So a medication error occurred during prescription, preparation of the medication, etc. But it is detected and intercepted by an active intervention of an additional person. When such scenarios are reported, the selected term for the intercepted error should represent the stage where the error occurred, not where it was prevented. So that's very important. So when such scenarios are reported, the selected term for the intercepted error, it should represent the stage where the error occurred, not where it was prevented. Oops, go back. Okay, so meaning that when it is reported that a pharmacist dispensed the wrong drug, but the nurse identified the error before giving it to the patient, we would select intercepted drug dispensing error. Under the PT, intercepted product dispensing error, capturing the stage where the error actually occurred. We would not code to the LLT intercepted administration error because the nurse did nothing wrong. The error occurred at the dispensing stage. So Sarah, with that, I'll just take a brief pause to see if there are any questions before I move on.
Yes, we just got some. So let me see this first one. It says, Regarding off-label, you suggest not to use off-label use if it is not specifically reported. During a literature publication review, we came across off-label use situations as per the company label. Does this rule apply to literature cases?
So if you are coding a term, yes, it would apply. It's across the board. You only code to off-label use if it's specifically stated. So I know we get this question a lot. And in the future, maybe we will look into different terms to kind of capture, because we understand that you maybe see, but then again, it's inferring, right? You maybe know that this is off-label as per your company, labeling guidelines or whatever. But again, it should be explicitly reported that it was used off-label across the board for anyone.
Perfect. And then we only have one more, and it says potential medication errors versus quality deviation, example, a blurred print. So my question is, should quality deviations be reported?
Yes, if they are so by quality deviation, though, what is meant? Can you repeat that one more time?
Yep, it says, potential medication error versus quality deviation, for example, blurred print. My question is, should quality deviations be reported?
In that case, yes, it should be reported. It would be reported and then coded as well. So a deviation. And as we'll go through the rest of the stages, maybe that will also help to shed some more light on some of these. And we had the example earlier with the blurred print type of example as well that we coded. So any more questions? Or?
One just popped up and it said slide 34. So if you want to go back to that slide, it said, what should the PT for the dose calculation error and hypotension?
Slide 34. Sorry, that's way back. 34 is my slide. Yeah. Well, maybe we can come back to this question, Sarah. Maybe you can get me the
Yes, I'll reach back out and we'll find out the exact slide.
Let me get back to where I need to be for. You could reach out and just get them to pull up the exact example, and then instead of me going back in my slide deck, we'll just try to have it written out, and then maybe I can address it that way.
Perfect.
That
Sounds
good.
Easier.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, we'll move on, and we'll continue on with the stages, right? Or the points. So we already talked about the stages of the medication use process when looking into the HLGT medication errors and other product use issues, use errors and issues, and the measure hierarchy underneath. This slide shows the different stages, starting with the storage of the medication, continuing with the prescribing stage, transcribing stage, preparation, and dispensing stage. So the administration stage, and finally the monitoring stage. So one of the principal MEDRA coding rules, code as specifically as possible, capturing the full information of what has been reported, also applies to coding of medication errors, meaning that if a specific error is reported that occurred at a specific stage of the medication use process, we should capture the full information, the type of error, and the stage where it occurred. So MEDRA contains many terms that capture both the type of error and the stage. For instance, wrong drug prescribed. So other LLTs only capture the type of error, like the LLT wrong drug or wrong dose. So if the stage where the error occurred is unknown, you can select the LLTs for the type of error. And others capture the stage only, like LLT drug prescribing error or the LLT drug dispensing error. So again, if the error is not specified, you would just select an LLT to capture where the stage where the error occurred. So always capture both the stage and the type of error where it is known. So if the stage is not known, capture the type of error only. If the type of error is unknown, you capture the stage only. So hopefully that's making more sense. It kind of helps to answer the question we had earlier as well. Okay, so when both the stage and the type of error are reported, you would look for a combination term in MEDRA and use a single LLT to capture the full information when possible. So this can be seen in the first example. When it is reported that the pharmacy dispensed the wrong drug, the LLT wrong drug dispensed would capture the full information. So there is no need to assign two codes like LLT wrong drug and then drug dispensing error. We have a term that captures both wrong drug dispense. but sometimes you may not find a suitable combination term. So if it is reported that a doctor mistakenly prescribed the wrong strength, you would have to split, and by split, I mean query to split. Or if in drug safety, again, you may have the ability to split, adding parentheses, or maybe you do send a query again to capture the reported information in full by assigning the LLT wrong strength and LLT drug prescribing error to the individual terms. Okay, so you heard me mention earlier contributing factors, so now we'll get into that a little bit. So we shortly addressed them when we were talking about potential medication errors, right? So the new version of the companion document provides a measure concept description for contributing factors. So as we saw earlier, you can go into the browser, you can go to concept descriptions, and you can click on C, and you will see here contributing factor is available. So you can always reference it there. So if a medication error is reported in conjunction with the actual cause of this error, then always select a term for the contributing factor plus the resulting error. Remember what we discussed earlier. Contributing factors are critical to understand why an error occurred and to identify interventions that can be undertaken to prevent the error. That is why many regulators are very interested in obtaining information about these contributing factors. But of course, there are contributing factors which are not in scope of MedDRA. So as an example, organizational system issues such as noise level, fatigue, and staffing levels may contribute to medication errors, but these factors may not have specific measured terms. So such scenarios can be coded to an overarching term like organizational system issue contributing factor, and the specific organizational system issues should be recorded in free text. That is in the narrative section of the case report. So that doesn't have to be, so it should be reported in free text. Okay, so the next example describes such a case. So a doctor wrote a prescription for 40 milligrams of drug X for angina every 6 hours, but because of the illegibility of the prescription, as you can see on the slide, the nurse administered the same dose of drug Y, a calcium channel blocker used in the treatment of hypertension, for which the maximum daily dose is only 10 milligrams. So because of the error made, the patient received 160 milligrams of this calcium channel blocker per day, 4 times 40 milligrams. And a day after taking the first 4 overdoses of the calcium channel blocker, the patient suffered a heart attack and died. So what needs to be captured here? At first, the illegible written prescription, then the resulting medication errors and administration of the wrong drug, and the accidental overdose, and as you can see here, the resulting adverse reaction in the patient, the heart attack. So remember, it is very important to capture the contributing factor or factors if reported. And of course, also the indication for use, the angina pectoris, would have to be coded as well in your indication section. So there you go. The contributing factor was the prescription was illegible. So again, as to what we also, the example we also, the question I mean, that I also received. Okay, so principle 7, do not infer a medication error. Now I know I already kind of went through this, but remember another basic rule for coding, code as reported. Do not add or subtract relevant medical information. This is what I was saying. You know, sometimes you do have to kind of take that hat off and kind of put yourself in a more general realm and, you know, think about it from a bigger, larger perspective, you know, outside of maybe how you would regularly think, sometimes to kind of see, you know, what is actually happening. So the same rule also applies to the coding of medication errors. So if you receive a verbatim that describes a deviation from the label and unauthorized use of a product, only select an LLT or LLTs that reflect what has been reported. Do not assume that a medication or device use error occurred if this is not made clear in the verbatim. And here's an example of that. So if it is reported that a nurse administered 50 milligrams of drug X, do not assume that this is a medication error. Try to obtain more information from the reporter or find out the dose range referencing the prescribing information of the respective drug. Okay, so the next slide shows the last principle we will discuss today. how to capture medication errors related to products with a drug delivery device. So an increasing number of marketed products are intended for use with a drug delivery device, like a drug device combination product, or co-packaged in a kit, or separately distributed but labeled for use with a specific device. So similar to what we already discussed for medications, safety reports for these products may relate to medication errors, to complications when using the device, like for instance, a needle stick injury, or to product quality issues, as well as consequent adverse events in the patient. And as always, in the case of incomplete or ambiguous reports, clarification should be sought to clarify whether the incident is related to device issue, malfunction, or device use error. Here we will see an example of this. Okay, so we'll look at an example from the new version of the companion document. So it's reported that due to a new design, a pen was difficult to activate. A patient pushed the plunger button as hard as he could, but managed to deliver only a partial dose. So the device quality issue, the new design, led to problems when the patient was using the pen. Both need to be captured, right? The device quality issue and the device use issue. It is a chain of events like we discussed earlier. So the device quality issue is a contributing factor to the fact that the patient has difficulties using it. So in this case, we would assign the LLT product design issue, which goes to the same PT as you can see here. And this PT is grouped under the SOC product issues and the HLT product quality issues, NEC, not elsewhere classified. And then the LLT drug delivery device component difficult to use under the PT device difficult to use that resides under the SOC injury, poisoning, and procedural complications, and the HLT of medication errors, product use errors, and issues not elsewhere classified. And we also have to capture the consequent medication error by assigning the partial dose delivery by device. Under the PT, incorrect dose administered by device. So as you can see, it's a chain of events, and therefore it's recommended that these terms get split out, whether you query or however your organization decides to handle splitting of terms, and then each term coded individually. Oh, and there's the last one. I'm sorry, I didn't pull it up. But medication error, and then as you could see, the LLT partial dose delivery by device would also be selected. Okay, so with that being said, we went through all the concepts. Now we're going to go into a coding demonstration. But first, I just want to check to see if there are any additional questions.
Yep, we got a couple. They said, in regard to the example of that blurred label, we would like to know if the patient is not involved, it should be considered PV case and coded.
What does that mean if the patient is not involved? If it never made it to the patient, it's still, if the prescription was still illegible, that would need to be recorded. But again, it's what information would come in from your source, right, from the site. So in that case, you would have to make an internal determination on how you want to handle that and what comes in actually. I would have to, be working in the company and see what's coming in and then make that determination. But if it's an illegible prescription that never made it to the patient, you would still want to capture that information. We do have terms available as we saw.
Great. And another one, it says, if in the label the dose is 200 milligrams, but in special conditions can be 100 milligrams, and in the case 100 milligrams dose is reported without any further information, should it be captured? And if yes, how should it be coded?
So you're saying that so in the label it's 200, but then it's reported as 100. But in some situations, it can be 100. Is that am I understanding that correct?
It said it's special.
So basically, you're kind of just inferring. So whatever, it's hard for me to address that because I would have to actually see what's in your labeling, and you would have to go by what's in your labeling. If it's 200, if it's labeled for both 200 and 100, then that's one thing. But if it's only labeled for 200 and they only gave 100, then of course you would want to capture that and code that. So it all depends on what your labeling looks like for that product. That's a very specific question, so I won't go much more into detail on that. I also forgot to mention, I'll do it now before we start going through our examples, because this last piece of the webinar we're going to go through today. If you do have a specific, because that was very specific, and typically, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I don't want to, I will avoid going into how to code something specific that may come into an organization, because that's something the organization has to take a decision on internally. And it would all depend on your coding conventions, you know, what you pull from the companion document and the PTC, how you want to handle it, your labeling, what countries you're in, all different types of things, right? That I do not have any information. I'm not privy to any of that. So it would be very difficult for me to answer these questions. If you do, however, have something and you want to word it as a general kind of concept, you can submit that. You can let me know. I'm going to have a feedback at the end and give me, I run myself and my colleague, Samina, we run a Let's Code together. We try to do it twice a year. And that is the forum where we would then, you know, take some of these suggestions we get that are more specific, and we would work through them and kind of give our opinion on, okay, if we only receive this, if we only know this. So you can kind of, you know, offer that as a suggestion that maybe we will use in a future class. And then, you know, because in that type of environment, we can give more of a general opinion on, you know, what we would do if we were the ones coding that, and give suggestions maybe for how an organization can handle it moving forward. So are there any more questions at this point, or?
Nope, it was just those two. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, because I was going to say at this point, I just want to get started with the examples, but that works out great. So we'll just keep moving forward. So before we go into the examples, the first thing we should do is always assess the reported information. You should always check for the 3 criteria for classification. Then check what stage the error occurred and whether it led to subsequent errors or even harm in the patient. If contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. So, or was the report referring to circumstances that could maybe potentially lead to a medication error? Or was the error intercepted before reaching the patient? Because the type of report, the type of information that you get will influence the way you search for appropriate terms, right? All the information we have always influences how we will search. So it will help you find the most suitable LLTs, the closest matches. So with that being said, we'll move on to our first example. So it is reported that the nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. What can we take from this report? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? In this case, yes. We know that the incident happened accidentally. The nurse forgot. Do we know who caused it? In this case, yes, an HCP, a nurse. Was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was, right? We also know the stage where the error occurred. But we also know the stage where the error occurred, so that's a yes too. And then, but we do not know if, but no contributing factors were reported, like you can see here. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up my polling, and we're going to go on to the next poll and give it your best go, and then I'll walk you through the correct responses, and why some of these maybe aren't the correct response. So everyone can give it a go. So the nurse forgot to administer the second dose of the chemotherapy treatment to the patient. Let's see what y'all think, and then we'll give the answer. All right, looks like, wow, a lot of you are all agreeing again. There's some picking other choices. All right, I'll give a couple more seconds. Looks like drug dose omission and errors winning right now. A little more time for people to be able to search the browser and go in and what I would suggest is, you know, looking at like when I showed you the browser, go into the HLGT of medication errors and start looking around. All right, looks like it's kind of come to a halt. So we'll continue on here. And the first thing we would do is look at our decision chart, like I mentioned earlier. So we know that the incident was caused by an error, right? It was not intentional. We know that it was caused by the nurse, not the HCP, right? By the nurse, an HCP, I should say. And we know that it occurred in the framework of the therapeutic use. So the incident has to be classified as a medication error. So in this case, the SOC or injury, HLGT, under the SOC of injury, the SOC of injury, the HLGT medication errors, we know that it was an administration error. So we would look into, or what I would recommend looking into is the HLT of product administration errors and issues. So here you'll find PTs such as product dose omission and error with an LLT of drug dose omission and error. You can also see PTs of product dose omission. And if you want to follow along in your browser, you can go in and go to the HLGT medication errors and then look under the HLT product administration errors and issues and look at the PT product dose omission and error. And you can also see PT product dose omission issue with the LLT drug dose omission, a vague term that can be used when it's not clear whether the dose omission occurred intentionally or accidentally. So again, you can also look under the, or what I would recommend in the future looking under would be inappropriate schedule of product administration. So LLTs under there would be selected when it is reported that the dose omissions occur regularly, take place more often, like when a patient takes a once daily dose less frequently. And again, the LLT drug use for unapproved schedule, it's grouped under the PT of product use issue, a PT that is much too vague for the reported scenario, right? And then we have the PT therapy interrupted, and it can be found in a SOC of surgical and medical procedures. LLTs under this PT should only be used when a therapy was interpreted due to reasons that are not under the control of the HCP or patient, consumer like supply, insurance, or financial issues. So like product availability issues, for instance, or when a patient cannot afford the medication. So in instances like that. So now I'll show you this is just a visual reminder of the choices that we used in the poll and then where you can find them in the browser. If you want to, take a look, looks like all of you were kind of in the same realm for what LLT you wanted to select. So with that being said, the final proposal for this term and the correct term to select would be the LLT drug dose omission and error under the PT product dose omission and error. So very good job, those of you who selected drug dose omission and error. Okay, we will go on to a second example. So the next example, so here it is reported that a patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. So what do we know based on the information provided? Was it accidental or intentional? Yes. We know that the incident happened accidentally. The patient did not read the instructions thoroughly enough. So do we know who caused it? Yes, the patient caused it, right? Was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred. So you might want to click the drug was administered, right? So that's the stage. But no contributing factor was reported. So once again, we had no contributing factor. So we know that the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly, but we don't know why, whether he was under stress, distracted, or whatever the case may be, right? So in this case, we'll go to our next poll. Oops, pull up the proper poll. We'll go here and we'll just activate this. So what do you think would be the correct LLT choice? For patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. Then we'll go through the tree. And again, for what I would suggest here, when you're searching in the browser, I would first look for a combination term, right? Indication, admin, maybe something will come up, maybe not. Then you can also search for things like indication and use in that little search bar like we saw here. You could see indication, use, and see kind of what pops up there. And you can right click and go kind of keep searching around in that way. Let's see what we're getting here. Wow, a lot of majority, again, the same types of everybody kind of three-fourths around. That's pretty good. for one answer. So let's see if everyone will be correct. Give it another couple seconds if people want a little more time to kind of search around. Okay, it's going up higher now. All right, so with that being said, again, we'll go to our decision-making tree, our decision chart, I should say, to classify the incident first. So we know that the incident happened accidentally, right? We know that it was caused by the patient. We know that it was in the context of therapeutic use, so yes. And so that means it describes a medication error. It is not reported that the patient instructions in the label were confusing, just that the patient did not read them thoroughly, right? So that's an important piece to know, because that's where, again, you kind of have to take your hat off. So it's not reported that the patient instructions in the label themselves were confusing. It was just that the patient did not read them thoroughly. So again, I just put this up, but you could see here, if we did search the indication and use, if you went in and searched in your browser like I showed you, you would find the LLT, unintentional use for unapproved indication, capturing the accidental nature of the incident, plus the LLT, drug use for unapproved indication, which is more vague. But we do not capture the fact that the drug was accidentally finally administered with this code assignment. It would be necessary to split code to capture the full information and the selected LLT drug administration error in addition. So with this LLT, we capture the accidental nature of the incident, and that is why both the LLTs, unintentional use for unapproved indication and drug use for unapproved indication, can be used to capture the details of the administration error, that the drug was taken for the wrong indication. And LLT, off-label use in unapproved indication, would be incorrect, right? We had that as one of our choices because the verbatim does not describe an off-label use. The LLT, as we see down here, product leaflet instructions confusion, you would see that there's LLTs under the PT product label confusion, and these terms do not reflect what has been reported because the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly. It was not reported that the instructions themselves were confusing. So again, this is just a visual representation of the terms from the poll and where we would find them in the browser. So you don't have to worry, if you didn't get to searching them all, you could see it here, where they fall and what's available. So with that being said, my final suggestion would be unintentional use for approved indication here does not capture the full information, and therefore splitting is required for this scenario. The companion document clearly states that coding a singular error by selecting two error terms is useful when this provides meaningful additional information. In other words, when the single LLT cannot describe the entire reported scenario. So the fact that the drug was finally administered has to be captured in addition. So alternatively, one could also assign the LLT drug use for unapproved indication, with the argument that the accidental nature is already captured by the LLT drug administration error. Personally, I prefer the assignment of the LLT shown on the slide because it is the most specific term. It captures the fact that the drug used for the unapproved indication happened accidentally, and we should always try to code as specifically as possible. Okay, so going on to example number 3. A patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. So again, let's look at all our questions. We always go through these questions, see what's going on, see what information we can get. So is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, it was. We know that the patient consciously decided to take more than a recommended dose to get a better drug effect. So do we know who caused it? Yes, it was the patient, right? Was it in a framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. And we also know the stage where the error occurred. We know that it was administered. And again, no contributing factors were provided. So I'm going to pull up another poll for you all to see how you would code the patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. Let's see what you think here, and then we'll go through our decision tree. Let's see what you get here. All right, looks like we're kind of split. And I apologize because I just realized my poll might not be set up to pick more than one term at a time. But you can pick the one you think and then just keep it in your mind or write it down or whatever you want to do if you have more than one. So when I go through the final answer, you could see if you were correct. Next time I will change this to open-ended. I like it. I think it's better so that everybody has a chance to type in what they think it could be. And then we don't run into this problem. But maybe you can. I forgot if I clicked the button or not, so I apologize. But patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. And this is maybe why we're split 50-50 too, right? We'll see here when we go through the answers. Okay, so it looks like, wow, almost perfectly split from intentional overdose and intentional misuse by dose change. Very interesting. Okay. All right, looks like the poll is slowing down. I'll make sure everyone has enough time. Okay. Oh, now we're shifting. All right. So with that being said, we will go into our decision making. So again, we have a different scenario, right? The patient themselves took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. So we know it was intentional, right? We know that it was caused by the patient, not the HCP. We know that it was for a therapeutic purpose, meaning the verbatim describes an intentional product misuse or an intentional drug misuse. So here are the terms we had in our poll, all provided with screenshots from the browser, which was very nice, showing the LLTs of the quiz. So the LLT unapproved dose administered is grouped under the product use issues. So just to give you a little background on that, we did get several change requests because I know I mentioned change requests earlier, and you do have the opportunity if you don't see what you need available to submit a change request. So here's a situation where we, the MSSO, did get several change requests to move this LLT, but the placement is actually correct. So several of our users wanted this LLT rerouted to a different area MedDRA. And the use of an unapproved dose is not necessarily incorrect when it occurs in the context of an off-label use. So it's open to multiple circumstances, unintentional, intentional misuse, off-label use, etc. And the current placement, therefore, is the most appropriate. So the unapproved dose administered. So the LLT incorrect dosage administered represents a dosage administration issue or error, not an intentional misuse. So similarly, the LLT wrong dose administered does not intentional misuse concept, does not represent. It's grouped under the PT incorrect dose administered and represents a dose administration issue or error, right? And remember the difference we talked about between dose and dosage. And again, if you don't know the difference between dose and dosage, you could come to your MedDRA browser, open the concept description. You can click on dose and dosage, and you see here, on D, and you will see here that dosage, the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, and number of doses, whereas dose refers to a quantity to be administered at one time, such as a specified amount of medication. So you do see they do differ. And I already mentioned that coding to the LLT intentional overdose would be inappropriate because more information about the drug and the labeled dose range would be needed to do so, right? So with that being said, I will give you my final answer. And here's the final suggestion. The LLT intentional misuse by dose change to the PT intentional product misuse. So very good job, those of you who chose that. And if I go back to my poll again, we could see that 59% did do so. And again, the reason why the intentional overdose, which was the next, I'm just looking at the poll here, which was the next pick term, is because the information about the drug and the labeled dose range would be needed in order to pick that. So just so you know. Okay, so now we'll go on to the fourth example. So next exercise is doctor prescribed drug A off-label to suppress preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. So what does this verbatim tell us? Do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we do. We know that it was a conscious decision. Do we know who caused it? We do, a doctor, right? Or an HCP. Was it in a framework of therapeutic use? It was. All criteria for classification of the incident as off-label use are met here. It is also reported that the doctor used the drug off-label and clearly in there. And we also know that the stage where the issue occurred, yes, we do. At the stage of prescribing, right? The drug was prescribed off-label for a patient suffering preterm labor. Were there any contributing factors? Nope. In this case, again, no contributing factors. So let's go to our next poll question. Just gonna scroll down here and activate this for y'all. Okay, so doctor prescribed drug A off-label for suppression of preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. I'm having trouble with that word today. It's probably because I had a little cold last week. Some words are coming out a little different than they normally would, if anybody cares. But anyway, so let's see what y'all think. And then we will go through our decision-making and get the final response. All right, so it looks like here, what else? Off-label use and unapproved indication. Drug prescribed for unapproved indication. Nobody's going for the top two. Okay, we'll give a little more time. Looks like it's not changing, 60%. Getting a lot of agreement in this class. It's good. Considering, again, like I said, such a diverse class. All right, looks like the poll is slowing down. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. And we will go through our decision making, right? So again, let's use our decision chart. So we know it was a conscious decision. It was made after careful risk-benefit assessment, right? So it was intentional. We also know that the decision was made by the doctor. We know that it was for a therapeutic purpose. And in this case, the incident can be classified as off-label use based on our 3 criteria, and because we are also provided with the information that the doctor prescribed the drug off-label, and we can select a suitable term under the PT off-label use. So there you have it with that. Okay, so here's just an example of, again, I always show our choices and the screenshots in the browser. So the LLT, drug use for unapproved indication, it's too vague, right? It doesn't capture the off-label use. Drug prescribing error is incorrect because we know that this was a conscious decision. So very good. I don't think anybody selected that of the physician. And drug prescribed for unapproved indication is again too vague when looking at the PT name. Intentional use for unlabeled indication. This is grouped under intentional product use issue, not representing off-label use. So this LLT could be used, for example, when a patient intentionally decides to take a drug for an unlabeled indication without knowing whether this was for therapeutic purposes. So the best match in this case is off-label use in an unapproved indication. So very good job, everyone who selected it. And then just as a side note, the preterm labor would, of course, also be coded in that case, right? Something of interest. So we have 67% with off-label use in unapproved indication. Very good job. Must be too easy. Everyone's getting them right, or everyone learned a lot today, right? So this is good. Good way to keep going. So with our last example today, it's reported that a doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. So he mixed up the names and then prescribed the wrong medication. So what can we take from this? We know that it was accidental. We know who caused it. Yes, the doctor. Was it in the context of therapeutic use? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where it occurred, the prescribing stage. And was there a contributing factor that has to be captured? Yes, in this case, the first example, there was a contributing factor that was reported. So we'll go to our last poll for the day. oh, not our last, because I have one more after this, but our last example, if I can pull this up. Hold on one second. Oops. Okay. Just go here. Sorry. You got my slide back now. I don't know what happened. Of course, I had to have a technical thing. I was all proud today, no technical issues, but you know, always happens. Technology, right? Great and not great. So here you go. The doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. So how would you code this? Give it your best shot. All right, we're going, whoa, lots of people choosing the same one. Yeah. We get 3 with zeros. Very interesting. Nobody's going for a wrong drug administered, wrong drug, or product confusion. All right, let's see. Give a couple more seconds for this. A little bit of time. Looks like wrong drug prescribed is holding firm. And also drug name lookalike is getting some results. And again, I apologize if you weren't allowed to select 2. You can keep in your head if you want to, or maybe you are. I mean, hopefully it is allowing, but okay, so it looks like the poll is slowing down. So what we'll do now is we will go through our decision tree like we always do. So we know that this occurred unintentionally, right? It was an accident. We also know that it was caused by the doctor. And we know that it happened in the framework of therapeutic use, right? So meaning this incident represents a medication error. And remember, we also had contributing factor here. So here is a review again of the proposed LLTs in the quiz. Excuse me one second. Okay, so we see here, the LLT wrong drug is too vague. It could relate to all different stages in the medication use process. So here it was reported that a wrong drug was prescribed. The LLT wrong drug administered would assume that this error reached the patient. This was not reported. The error may have been prevented from reaching the patient. We don't know. Then we have the LLT product confusion. Again, it would be too vague. A better, more specific term available for capturing the contributing factor leading to the prescribing error, that is the LLT drug name lookalike. And then we have the LLT, excuse me. Wrong. Wrong. Okay, wrong drug prescribed. Sorry, my voice is going. But also the LLT drug prescription issue is too vague because we know wrong drug was prescribed in error. Sorry about that. So LLT drug prescription issue is again too vague. All right. We'll try to continue on, even though now I sound a little bit crazy. All right, so here are your final, excuse me, assignments. Okay, so today in summary, so wrong drug prescribed, what product prescribing error, and drug name lookalike, product name confusion are your correct choices. And I apologize for my voice. Okay, so in summary, today, we are now approaching the end. So we looked into regulatory background for the topic of medication errors. I introduced helpful ICH guidance for coding of medication errors. We discussed related definitions and looked into some concept descriptions And we discussed general principles for coding of medication errors, and we applied them with some examples. So if you are responsible for coding medication error reports, please make sure to code the reported incidents as specifically as possible and make yourself familiar with the granularity of MedDRA in this area, right? And again, use the documents. So with that being said, I would just like to collect some feedback if you have any on today's class. Sorry, as I mentioned, I was battling a little cold last week, and it's better, but my voice sometimes, it goes, but I apologize for that. But if you would like, you could provide some feedback on today's quiz, today's webinar. And I'll also, Sarah, at this point, check in to see if there are any questions.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, good. But if you have any, feel free to put them in. And also, if you have any feedback on today's class, let me know. All right, we'll see if, I have to activate the poll. I'm sorry. That would help, right? So we'll go down here to feedback. We'll activate, and then you can leave me any feedback you have on today's class. If you have any suggestions, future suggestions, anything like that. And we'll let this stay open for a little bit so people have time to provide feedback. And all I have left is just we have some contact information for you that is available in the slide deck that you received today. So you have all these websites available to you. And we could check in on the polls, see if anything came through. Thank you. I apologize for my little tiny coughing fit at the end and my voice sounding like a crazy, but what can I do? I'm human. Things happen. Hopefully you got the gist of the last example, even though I had to say it in a weird voice. But all good. So thank you very much. Hopefully you all found it. And again, Sarah, I'll just do one last check-in to see if there are any questions.
Currently, no questions.
Okay. So with that being said, I would just like to thank everyone for taking literally almost 2 hours out of your busy day to join me today. I hope that everyone took away at least one important piece of information. And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone, maybe hopefully at an in-person event soon, or maybe we'll cross paths again virtually at another webinar. But thank you again. And what is today? It's Tuesday, right? So we're not quite at midweek. I was going to say, we're getting closer to the weekend. However, we're still a Tuesday, but hopefully it's a beautiful Tuesday wherever you are in the world, and you can enjoy the rest of your day or evening or morning, whatever it may be, and we can all get together soon. And again, if you do have any questions that you think of afterwards, you can always get in touch with us using the website we provided, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. But thank you again, and everyone have a great day.